As noted, we do, with the magic of Zoom, we're able to record these meetings. So we do that and then they get uploaded to the EPA site. So welcome everybody to the December meeting of the Citizens Coordinating Council. Appreciate everybody joining via Zoom. Let me kind of go through the agenda and then we'll dive in. Brandon will do just a quick tech check in a minute to make sure people are set with Zoom. And if there's any challenges, we'll try to address those before we start. And then we've got kind of order first, any kind of updates from Tim and the technical assistance grant update. So we turn to Tim first. Then EPA would cover a summary of the 5-year sediment sampling data from the first half-mile and 1.5-mile sediment sampling. So we'll do that next. Then there's been some work around REACH 6, which they will explain what that means in a minute, and about the Woods Pond pre-design work plan for the work that's going on there. So they'll cover there at 6:35. And then we'll talk a little bit about the monitoring and maintenance of non-GE owned dams, which has been, I think, an ongoing thing people have been asking about. We'll talk a little bit about water withdrawal and the like with climate, and then we'll close up with where we're at with the upland disposal facility. After each section, we'll have a presentation by EPA, comments by the CCC, and then we'll at least leave a little bit of time for public comment if there's questions or time as well. We've got a fair amount to cover, so we may have to cut folks off a little bit, but we'll also make sure there's time at the end as well. So any questions about the agenda for tonight? All right, Brandon, you want to do just a quick kind of reminder about Zoom and where raise hand is and all that, and see if there's anybody who needs help.
Yeah, so folks, you can raise your hands by going at the bottom of your Zoom panel where it says reactions, and then you should see something there once you click that says raise hand, like I just did. And you can also lower your hand. That's helpful when we have questions and answers and that kind of thing. If you're on your phone, I believe it's *9, raise your hand.
That's right.
And *9 to lower your hand. Also, we ask you to mute if you can when you're not speaking, just to help with audio. On your phone, it's *6 to mute, *6 to unmute. So feel free to point out any questions, and happy to answer tech questions as they come up.
Great. Anybody have any technical questions in terms of Zoom before we get started? Okay, and the recordings are available to the public. And Kelsey, if you could just put in the chat the link for the CAG, including the recordings, that'd be super helpful. Just a reminder to CAG members, CCC members, sorry, is that want to have a rich discussion. Disagreement is expected and often the case. I would ask that people just kind of do the respect of not avoiding personal attacks, whether that's of EPA folks or DEP or each other. Again, people can disagree strongly on the substance, but I ask people refrain from personal attacks. I think last time that got a little bit out of hand, so we want to watch that tonight. Okay, so just a little bit of that note, and with that, I think we'll get started. So Tim, I'm going to turn it over to you.
Okay, well, we are working, we have identified an advisor that we'd like to hire for our TAG grant. And some of the ways that the TAG grant is administered are strange to us because you have to go out and evidently get 2 other people to give you, estimates, even though you have no intention of hiring them because you've identified somebody that you would think would be best for us as far as the TAG advisor. And so we're in a conundrum right now trying to figure out what we do about that, and find it just a little strange, in a way that we just can't go ahead and hire the advisor that we want without, getting these 2 other estimates from people that we probably wouldn't hire. Anyway, it seems sort of silly. We had a Riverfest in August. It was a success. Lots of people came out. We came out quite a bit positive in the donations department, and did pretty well. And musicians from all over Berkshire County came out to play, to stop the dump and to try to get a better cleanup for our river. We just completed an adjudicatory hearing in the town of Lee with the Board of Health, and the Board of Health is looking into whether or not this dump is going to be good for the citizens for our town, because the town has a very different opinion than EPA and DEP and all the other folks there on the other side of the table. And, you know, one thing we've always known is if this dump was next to your houses, you'd be against it. It's very simple. And so we have this adjudicatory hearing. It has been completed, and we are still working on winding up that information. We've gotten very concerned about truck traffic coming in because of this dump into our neighborhoods coming through the Berkshire County and how much they're going to be trucking. And we're very worried about that. And, you know, EPA in their document says that it's going to be sealed trucks, but they told us that up in Pittsfield too, that it was going to be sealed trucks. And, you know, what we witnessed in Pittsfield was a piece of plastic on the bottom of the truck and a tarp on the top, which is not really that much different than what they carry plain old gravel in. We also want to make note always that our water supply is only 1.1 miles from this dump. And we have lots of experts telling us that that is not a good thing, that you should never put a dump of this kind near a water supply. We all know about volatilization. I know we've had to teach EPA about that because in 1993, they told us it didn't exist. And anyway, EPA doesn't always do and make the right decisions here. I also just want to, for those of you that might not know, is this dump is very close to the river, and it's like equally up in height from the river. Okay, so it's you know, I think it's 1,000 feet from the river and 1,000 feet up in height, or 1,100 feet up in height, something along those lines. But anyway, it's very close to the river that supposedly we're already going to be cleaning up, and it's also been identified by the geologist as who was a geologist that EPA, who the EPA Region 1 gave an award to for his outstanding geology, says that it's the worst place that you could ever possibly put this kind of dump. And we have since found out that it appears that New York State now will not allow a dump in a gravel, you know, in this kind of gravel sand situation in New York State anymore. So they're coming for Massachusetts sooner or later. And I also wanted to point out, you know, I'm just concerned a little bit about the liner debate, and people are always talking about, you know, liners this, liners that, EPA, you know, I've seen crazy stuff written this in the last year too, you know, EPA, I think, was saying 800 years was a figure that went by my desk one day. It's just absolutely crazy. But I do believe I think it's in OPCA 71, the high level area up in Pittsfield. I think one of the liners has had an issue there. Now I know what EPA will respond is they're going to tell me, well, the second liner did what it's supposed to do and everything's okay. But guess what? This thing's only been in the ground, you know, for I don't know how many years now. What is it, 15 years, maybe 20? And the liner, one of the liners is giving us problems. And everybody always tells us the liners are fail safe and they're good. And then I'm going to end with this tonight, that everybody, you might want to take a read of this. This is a 2016 report. I don't know if you can even see it.
So kind of.
Yeah, it's not good to do it on the Zoom here, but it's called Landfill Failures, The Buried Truth. Written in 2016 by the Center for Health and Environmental Justice. And I think it's 175 pages long. But I think EPA should read this, because the bottom line is this document really tells you the truth about liners, landfills, and what's been happening. So everybody that's on tonight, look this up. It's called the Center for Health and Environmental Justice. Just Google up landfill failures, and you will find this document, and you will find out how ridiculous this is to put the landfill in a place that they're putting. Thank you.
Great. Thank you, Tim. Judy, I see your hand up. Over to you. Judy, over to you. Okay, there we go. Now I can hear you. Great.
So I always like to preface the meeting and wish that either you or Brandon would do this also, about the notes that are being taken and how the notes are processed once the meeting is over. As you know, we've had a long-standing problem with the way the notes are handled. They're called informal notes, and yet after the meeting, they're written up and they are then submitted to all of the agency participants. And the agency participants are then allowed to change the notes under the guise of clarifications. And granted, over the years, we now get red line copies. Recently, during the last meeting, I spoke to, again, the ongoing problem in Connecticut about the absolute paucity of adequate consumption advisory signs along the river. In addition, GE is mandated to publish a consumption advisory booklet that needs to go out to the public. They didn't do that this year. And after last month's meeting, Connecticut DEP assigned a staffer who did something, walked along the river where he or she thought it was appropriate, and gave their thumbs up that everything was a-okay. Prior to that meeting, I went out with a couple of people and photographed obvious places where there were no signs, and went back after the staffer said that everything was fine. And all of the places that were photographed still had no signs. So it might be advantageous for Susan and or Tracy to put this person in contact with us so that we can tour together. I know that DEP, Connecticut DEP, only likes to communicate with what they call their partners, meaning entities outside of DEP that always agree with Connecticut DEP. For anyone who doesn't agree with DEP, we're not considered a partner or valued, sufficiently valued to do things like do on-site tours with the fisheries people. So people need to know that the notes are not credible, although they go into the administrative record, and during court proceedings, they're used against us. So, the sign problem continues, and after the last meeting, subsequent to even the red line, the notes were updated to say that Connecticut DEP did their due diligence and everything was a-okay, and that was written into these quote unquote notes. That's a departure from what we do with action items, where you come back the next meeting and we discuss action items and how they've been addressed and what still remains open. So, we say a lot of things over and over again, and not much changes. So thank you.
Judy, I want to address the one specific issue you raised to see if we can make sure we're clear on the record for what happened. So in terms of when you took the photographs, was that after the last meeting or before? Just want to be clear so we get this right and we can fix anything that's mistaken or wrong. So did you do the photographs after last meeting?
No, the photographs were taken before the last meeting.
Okay. And then the notes, as far as you understand it, were updated after the last meeting, after they were red line strikeouts, saying that the Connecticut DP went to the sites and looked at it or something to that effect.
Indeed, and it was in. It looked to me like it was in 4-point font. It was added to the notes.
Okay. So what I think what we'll do, Judy, I think it's a totally fair point. So what I'd like to do is probably not consider them corrected tonight. What we do is engage with you and with Connecticut DEP, maybe not tonight because of short of time, and then see if we can make sure we are accurate in how those things transpired. Does that sound okay? And we'll work on it offline. Then we can bring back to the CCC next meeting any revisions we did for the notes from last time.
Yes, and one final point, again, related back to the TAG grant. So documents are coming out fast and furious, important documents, and we have a technical expert waiting in the wings. And because of the process involved in vetting and introducing someone new, because the last technical expert retired, we now have gone past extensions for deadlines for comments. So I'm requesting an extension to comments to all of these documents that have just been fast and furious coming out. They're important. We need to comment on them, but we need the expert to review them first. Just like what has been afforded to the Berkshire Regional Planning Commission municipal group, where they were guided through the process and handed, handpicked an entity of technical experts that does their comments. We're a little bit more, we're not guided through the process. We have to figure it out ourselves. So maybe EPA staffers might want to give us a hand in figuring out how to get this technical expert waiting in the wings in place as soon as possible. And for Tim Conway or Attorney Kilborn, we're requesting extensions on all documents that have come out in the recent past.
Great, thanks, Judy. I don't know if EPA, if there's anything you can do to help expedite bringing the TA on board to the via the TAG grant. Dean, go ahead.
Tim Gray is well aware, as is Judy. Bob Shewax, our coordinator for the TAG grant, has reached out to them many times. He's the official who manages the TAG grant. I would suggest reaching out to him. He can assist you in how to process your award.
May I speak? May I speak? Tim has contacted him a number of times with no response.
If you can forward me copies of those emails, I would appreciate that, because that's not what I'm hearing from Bob, and I talk to him every week. He's actually one of my employees now. So if you have documentation that he has not responded, I would appreciate receiving that. Otherwise, I would suggest reaching out to him.
And then I did EPA legal staff, if you just note the requesting for extension as well.
Yeah, we're not giving any more extensions. There's been 5 years since the TAG grant has been exercised. There's been plenty of time for people to line up consultants. The project's going to keep moving along.
There you go. Thank you so much.
And Brandon, thanks for putting the link to both in the chat there for the summaries, and we'll follow up afterwards with Connecticut DEP and Judy. Okay, I'm going to go to the first topic, which is the 1/2 mile and the 1.5 mile sediment sampling. So turn that over. I think Dean, you're covering that piece.
Yeah, I will cover it. Josh is going to run the presentation.
Okay.
One more thing before that, I'm not going to respond to all of Tim's comments. EPA's position on the safety of the UDF is on the record. However, there was a new statement made today that there's an issue with the liner in the Building 71 ACA. If you have any information on that, Tim, I would also appreciate it, because there is no issue with the liner, certainly not the bottom liner. There has been periodic erosion of clean soil on top of the top liner that gets repaired, which is fairly common, but there is no issue with the bottom liner at all. So again, if you've got any facts and you can provide them, I'd be willing to look at them. But I just want to make that clarification for others.
I would like to make a clarification back, as I didn't say that the bottom liner leaked. I was just telling people that one of the liners leaked within the 20, within 20 years of putting the liner in. That's it.
But it hasn't, Tim. Did you have any information?
You just told us it did.
Hey, Tim and Gene.
No, Tim, first of all, there's one bottom liner, so there's not two. So that's factually incorrect. There's a bottom liner, there's a top liner.
Right.
Top liner goes on top of the waste, gets covered with 2 feet of clean soil. The only issues we've had at the APCA has been erosion of clean soil above the top liner, no damage to the top liner. Certainly, we cannot even observe damage to the bottom liner, so that's factually incorrect. So if you've got some facts and you can send them to us, we will look at it.
Okay, so again, I think point noted, Dean, of clarity about the top liners. There's been soil erosion, not actually, I believe,
But
integrity.
soil erosion is not a failure of a liner.
We hear
It
you.
is soil erosion.
We hear you.
So you
And
don't have two liners on the bottom of 71?
No, we do not. There's one.
You have one liner under a high level dump?
That's correct, Tim. That's been the same way since
Wow.
the year 2000.
if
Wow,
again,
And by the way, you can look
astounding.
at the groundwater data around that and you'll see there's no PCBs.
let's do this,
Increasing
everybody. Dean, hang tight.
debating. So again, Tim, if you've got facts, we're willing to talk about it.
So let's do this. If people want to talk about liners and you know, and waysites, we certainly can do that. I think now's not the time. We've got a full agenda. So let's go ahead and move on to the
Sure.
1/2 mile and 1.5 mile sediment sampling.
All right, Josh, you want to do the next slide? We just wanted to let people know that we've added people to the team. We've added 2 project managers in the last year. One is Annie Laughlin, who's a senior EPA project manager, been with EPA for about 30 years, and Alex Carly Dorsey, excuse me, is a new member of the project manager team. So you may see their names on certain documents or correspondence. John Kilborn has been on the team from the beginning since 1998 and has been much more involved in the last few years. So he's helping out Tim Conway, and Ashlyn Brooks is going to help out Kelsey. Just in general, if you're looking for information or input, the best way to reach EPA is to go through Kelsey. Next. So this is just a brief agenda of what we're talking about. Like Pat said, I'm going to talk about some post-remediation sampling in the upper 2 mile reach. Then the project managers are going to go over a brief summary of what the contents of certain documents are for rest of river that are open for public input. They are just going to go over and point out certain areas in these documents. These are GE documents. They are not going to get into EPA's evaluation of the documents or critique of the documents. This is just to point out what the documents are and what some of the substance in those documents are. And then at the end, EPA will wrap up the status of the current input periods. Next. So a little background from 1999 to 2001 or 2002, GE remediated the upper 1/2 mile reach, which is the reach adjacent to GE's facility. And from 2002 to 2006, EPA remediated the sediment and riverbank in the next 1.5 miles. Since then, I think this is the 4th 5-year post-remediation sampling event, and all 5 have been conducted similarly. This year, you can see a summary of the samples collected in this past summer. So about 40 samples for the upper 1/2 mile and 95 sample locations for the 1.5 miles, with some of them going deeper than 0 to 6 inches. Next. So some background, again, the pre-remediation concentrations are shown here. The surface sample, which is the most exposed to the environment, was over 100 parts per million to begin with. And then the other data is shown as well. Next. So like I said, we've done this is the 4th post-remediation sampling event. And the years were 2007, 12, 17, and 22. The last round is highlighted in red, and I'll just go to those 2 columns. You can see the average concentration in 2022 was 0.14 parts per million or milligrams per kilogram. It's the lowest of the 4 rounds of post-remediation sampling. And again, that's coming from an initial concentration of 112 parts per million. So it's, it shows 99.9% reduction in superficial PCBs. And again, this was the area adjacent to the GE facility with the highest concentration of contaminants. So we think that's shows representative of a very successful cleanup, and it also shows that the area is not recontaminating from whatever minor sources of PCBs there are still discharging to the river. Next. Similarly, the 1.5 miles, the concentrations were a little bit lower to start with, but they were still as high as 60 parts per million on average, 1 to 2 feet down, with lower levels measured at the surface. Next. So again, this is we coordinated the sampling of these events to coincide in the same 5-year period. And again, I'll focus on the right-hand side, which is the sampling that was done in 2012. You can see the average concentration is 0.11. That's very consistent with the 3 previous rounds that have ranged from 0.09 to 0.17. So very consistent and steady. And again, that shows a 99% reduction over pre-existing or pre-remediation, excuse me, sediment concentrations. And that's pretty consistent throughout the depths. And obviously the maximum is much, much less. So that's the summary of the post-remediation sampling. And if there's any questions on that, Pat, I think we can do that now.
Great. Any questions on the first 1.5 miles? Judy, your hand's up.
Yeah, a couple, Dean. So in the first set of samples, why were there no samples taken in 12 to 24 inch?
In the 1.5 miles, if you remember, and even in the 1/2 mile, after the sediment was remediated, it was backfilled with several layers, and the top layer of which was riprap or rock. So we did not sample in the depositional sampling below the rock. So there are some samples, I think there's an asterisk on some of these where the sample depths were up to 18 inches, but there's very few places, if any, where the depositional sampling is 24 inches deep.
So below the riprap, then what's below the riprap?
Below the riprap is all the clean backfill that was put in 5 years ago. GE did at EPA's request sample what's called the sorptive cap below the riprap. I don't have that data today, but that is in some report, in a report that GE submitted.
And the rug in the river, so can you give us a review on what's going on there? I know you've had to make punctures in the liner that's in the wet in the river to test it, and the rug in the river was put in there because when you kept digging, you could not find the end of either the coal tars or the PCB oils.
That's correct, Judy. We made a decision early on that we were not going to get to clean or less than 1 ppm on average in the upper 1/2 mile. So that's different than the 1.5 miles. So the 1.5 miles, we generally got to the 1 ppm level. So there's no sorptive cap or subaqueous cap in the 1.5 miles. In the 1/2 mile, there's filter fabric put down, which is very similar to silt fence. That was done for several reasons. So the first layer, when sediment was excavated to 1.5 or 2 feet in the dry to separate and prevent mixing of the sand or isolation, silty sand isolation layer with the underlying sediment, a filter fabric was placed on top of the existing sediment. It was then covered with 6 to 12 inches of the sand, silty sand, high in total organic carbon. Then there was another filter fabric placed on top of that, and that was covered with riprap, and that was at the suggestion of the Corps of Engineers, because if you place large riprap directly on top of sand without a filter fabric, the riprap will simply go through, sink through to the sand and down to the bottom. And that is not what we wanted. We wanted to keep the isolation layer or the siltation layer as much intact as possible. And then on top of that was the riprap, and then this depositional soil comes in on top of the riprap. The filter fabric is supposed to be permeable. It is somewhat permeable. However, there were some areas where there was a vertical gradient of water coming up through the river, and you could see water bubbles. You could see it making sort of a bubble in that fabric. The water was not getting through the filter fabric. It must have been clogged. There was 2 or 3 areas where that happened. And so that was slotted to let the water come through. It didn't affect the integrity of the cap. And then, like you said, when GE sampled the isolation layer, the silty sand layer, obviously you had to slice the geofabric and put a 2-inch tube in there to collect the sample.
Judy, follow up?
Well, yeah, so it's very difficult to monitor this and to ascertain if it's doing everything you had hoped it would do without sampling.
Right, that's why they did sample the isolation layer 5 years ago, and it showed that there was very little upward migration of PCBs. And the real measure is what's in the sediment on top. That's where the exposure to the biota is, and that's what this data shows.
Are you going to do an update tonight on the chlorobenzene ongoing leak that's getting into the river?
No, that wasn't on the agenda tonight.
Judy, we can do that as a future agenda. And what was that? You want to name that topic one more time?
Well, can you give us, like 30 seconds on what's going on with that?
Sure. There's a series of wells, groundwater wells, that measure the concentration of over 200 contaminants in the groundwater, both adjacent to the upper half mile, adjacent to this half mile reach, and also at other areas of the site. And there's performance standards, which I think we've talked about in the past. One of the contaminants that is elevated is chlorobenzene, and I believe in this area it's slightly above the default groundwater standard, and EPA is working with GE to improve and enhance their groundwater extraction and treatment. So it is slightly above the standard.
The last time I looked in the reports, the monthly reports about the chlorobenzene leak, GE was approached to sample biota in that area where it's getting into the river, and they refused to sample biota. Has that changed?
I don't think they were ever required to sample biota. They were given various options to, what GE wanted to do is modify the default standard of, I believe it's 1 part per billion, and they proposed potentially collecting biota as one way to lower the standard. I believe we rejected that option because we didn't think it was the best way to go about it, and we retained the 1 part per billion standard, and they need to meet that.
Thank you.
Thanks, Judy. Let me go to Charlie, and just because of time, we'll probably go to the next topic. But Charlie, a final word on this topic before we go to Woods Pond. Charlie, you're on mute.
Sorry about that.
There you go.
A couple questions for Dean. The locations of these samplings, the most recent ones, are they the same places that were originally sampled back in 2002? Did you add additional ones? Are there places that may have been added behind a bridge abutment or some other type of place in the river that could be collecting a little more silt and sediment? How did they determine where these samples were coming from?
It's been a while, but I believe for the 1.5 miles, because EPA did the characterization on that, we did what's called transects every 50 feet or every 100 feet. down the river and did 3 samples per transect, 1 middle, 1 left, and 1 on the right. And that was all done with the the characterization pre-remediation, and the post-remediation followed that same process. So within the measurement of error of resurveying the 100 feet, GE sent surveyors out there. They staked it, and within a foot or two, I would assume it's the same location. The half mile was a little different. I think it was set up in advance in the consent decree, the 39 locations that GE had to sample post remediation. Those may or may not have lined up directly with pre-remediation samples, because it was 2 kind of distinct events. But the 1.5 miles is much more consistent with the pre and post sampling locations. So it was, I forget the exact word. It was a grid-based, or a grid-based sampling, Charlie. Like every 100 feet, it wasn't targeted or biased towards any particular location.
Let me get one member of the public in for a question, and then after that we do need to move on. But Nancy, over to you. Want to make sure there's a chance for at least one public member. So go ahead. And Nancy, you need to come off mute if you can. Nancy, we can't hear you. Okay, well, maybe we'll return to that in a little bit. So why don't we go ahead and, just for sake of time, move on to Woods Pond if we could.
Okay, so Josh is going to take over on the Woods Pond pre-design investigation report, the summary of what's in that document.
Good evening, everyone. My name is Josh Fontaine. As Dean mentioned at the beginning of the presentation, I'm one of the project managers on the EPA team. Tonight, I'm going to not only talk about what's in the PDI investigation work plan for Reach 6, but I'm also going to be talking a little bit about the non-GE owned dams and the requirements for the final permit. So to start, the Reach 6 PDI work plan was submitted on November 3rd, 2022, and is designed to provide the data necessary to meet the requirements of the revised final permit and support remedial design for Woods Pond and the associated floodplain. The scope of work in the PDI work plan includes field surveys, which is comprised of bathymetric surveys, sediment probing, and shoreline structures and utility surveys. And then there's also a sampling and analysis component, which includes the sediment sampling, floodplain soil sampling, and geotechnical testing. In accordance with the revised final permit, bathymetric surveys are required to be completed prior to sediment removal. The bathymetric survey measures the depth of water, but also maps the underwater features of a water body. So in this case, it's showing us what the sediment topography is within Reach 6. GE completed an initial survey in 2022. However, due to low water conditions during the survey, certain areas were not accessible. GE will conduct a supplemental bathymetric survey in the non-accessed areas under this PDI work plan. So the map that you're seeing on the left of the screen shows the results of the 2022 bathymetric survey. The red, yellow, and orange areas denote the shallow sediment elevations, whereas the green, blue, and purple areas denote the deeper sediment elevations. In addition to the surveys, excuse me, there will also be some sediment probing, and this will be conducted to characterize sediment thickness and general texture in support of sampling activities and remedial design. GE will develop a 200-foot by 200-foot grid system encompassing the entire area of sediment to be removed. GE will then measure the sediment thickness at a minimum of 3 locations within each grid cell. Generally, the sediment probing will be conducted from shallow draft vessels or by wading in shallow water areas, and the probing will consist of advancing a small diameter steel rod manually through the sediment to refusal. Sediment probing will be conducted in advance of sediment sampling collection. However, the probing information will not be used to eliminate any of the proposed target sampling locations or depths. The presence of above ground and underground utilities could pose risks during sampling collection, and the remedial construction work both to the integrity of the utility and safety of the workers. Therefore, GE will conduct a survey of shoreline structures and utilities. Prior to PDI sampling and in accordance with Massachusetts law, utility clearance via DigSafe will be completed to coordinate utility identification and markouts. Identified utilities will be documented and surveyed as appropriate and depicted on future maps. The locations of the observed shoreline structures and utilities will also be documented during field activities conducted concurrently with the sediment and floodplain sampling programs. Another aspect of the utility survey will include GE actively providing outreach with local city building departments and county and state transportation agencies regarding utilities and structures that could impact the PDI, remedy implementation, worker safety, and/or utility integrity. Sediment sampling will be performed to characterize the PCB concentrations over the full vertical extent of sediments to be removed. The results of sediment samples collected during this PDI will be used to determine the volume weight average PCB concentrations of the sediment to be removed from Woods Pond. In addition, the results of samples collected from Woods Pond will be used to determine the length weighted average concentration at each vertical core location within the targeted removal depth. These data will be used to differentiate sediment suitable for disposal in the UDF from those being sent off-site for disposal. EPA has historically collected approximately 700 discrete samples from Reach 6, and through this PDI work plan, GE will collect an additional 84 core locations, including 66 cores within Woods Pond and 18 cores in the headwater transition zone between the downstream end of Reach 5C and Woods Pond. Samples will be segmented into 12-inch intervals and for each core location and submitted for PCB analysis. Now, the revised permit requires that the depth of sediment removal within Woods Pond be based on achieving a post capping minimum water depth of 6 feet. This is measured in comparison to the crest of Woods Pond Dam. Since the cap thickness has not yet been determined, GE will extend the depth of sediment coring 4 feet beyond what is needed to characterize the sediment or to refusal depth. At sampling locations where the existing top of sediment is already at or greater than 6 feet below the dam crest, core samples will be advanced to a total of depth of 4 feet below the existing mudline elevation or to refusal depth. And in the headwater transition zone, the sample cores will be advanced to depths of 4 feet below the existing mudline elevation or to refusal depth. GE will be using the same grid-based sampling approach for collection of sediment samples, similar to the sediment probing activities. Based on GE's sampling design and the 2022 bathymetric data, the estimated sampling will involve PCB analysis of approximately 476 discrete sediment samples from the 88 core locations. In addition, approximately 176 discrete 12-inch samples collected from the bottom 2 feet of each sediment core will be held for potential future PCB analysis. Please note, these sample quantities are based on field conditions and may change based on results of the sediment probing and if refusal is encountered.
Josh, just a quick question. You've not done this yet, right? So you don't know the refusal depth at this time, but will once you do the work.
Correct. That won't be known until we're actually in the field and seeing how the equipment is functioning.
Okay, great. Thank you.
So EPA's human health risk assessment divided the rest of river floodplain into 90 exposure areas for the assessment of direct human contact with floodplain soils. Of those 90 exposure areas, 5 exposure areas are located within Reach 6, including areas 56 through 60, as shown on the figure as shown on the figure to the left of the screen. Desktop evaluation and field survey to characterize the existing habitats in the Reach 6 floodplain will be conducted in accordance with GE's revised baseline restoration assessment work plan for the rest of river reaches 5B through 8, which is currently under EPA review. The approved floodplain sampling locations will be dependent on the outcome of these surveys. Generally, sampling locations will be collected on a grid-based sampling approach. Sample locations will be spaced approximately 100 feet apart in floodplain areas and within 200 feet of the Housatonic River or Woods Pond. The PDI work plan includes a collection of soil samples from 243 locations within the 5 non-residential exposure areas in the Reach 6 floodplain. Of these 243 locations, 219 are 1-foot sampling locations and 24 are the 3-foot sampling locations within frequently used subareas. Soil samples from these cores will also be collected in 6-inch intervals, where historical samples exist for intervals at a specific location. The new sample will be held for potential future analysis. In addition, the sampling will include some geotechnical testing. The geotechnical characterization will be performed to support the sediment removal design for Woods Pond. Specifically, geotechnical characterization data will provide information about the material types that will be subject to dredging, including the feasibility of hydraulically transporting the dredged material to the UDF, and to support an assessment of slope stability of the remaining sediment in the Reach 6. The geotechnical investigations will include collection of data to identify sediment material types, general index properties such as moisture content, organic content, grain size, Atterberg limits, density, and specific gravity. Additionally, GE will measure the shear strength of the sediment in the field using vane shear testing and submit samples to a laboratory for additional shear strength testing. The geotechnical samples will be collected or co-located, with the sediment samples. The specific samples subject to geotechnical analysis will be selected in the field to provide data that are spatially representative of Reach 6, but with a focus on near shore areas. Samples will also be selected to provide data for each unique geological material type and for various sampling depths, including sediment targeted for removal and sediment that will remain after dredging. The table below provides the approximate geotechnical numbers, which may be adjusted based on site conditions. Just for a little bit of background, Atterberg limits refer to the liquid limit and the plastic limit of soil. This test is strictly dependent on whatever number of fine-grained sediments that are encountered. And then the in situ vane shear testing is conducted using a shear test apparatus in the field. And that is also focused on looking at the strength of relatively fine-grained sediments such as clays and silts.
Great. Josh, how many more slides on Woods Pond? And I will go to Judy for a question. Do you have a few more?
I have one more on Woods Pond.
Okay, why don't you do that, and then we'll go back to questions.
All right. This one just kind of breaks down the schedule for what's to come. Right now, the field surveys, sediment sampling, and geotechnical testing is scheduled to begin 45 days following EPA's approval of the PDI work plan. Floodplain sampling is going to be slightly delayed because it's not only dependent on approval of the PDI work plan, but also on the baseline restoration assessment work plan for Reaches 5B through 8. Once all the data is collected, the Reach 6 PDI summary report will be submitted 9 months upon receipt of all validated data. And then, however, in the interim, GE is required to submit interim summary tables of the data collected from all of this work on a monthly basis. And I will now pass it to you, Pat, to open it for questions.
Okay, Josh, thank you. Great. Judy, over to you.
Thank you. Josh, could you tell me if for sampling, is EPA just going to do some split samples with GE?
There will be a component of split sampling, yes.
But GE is doing most of the sampling.
That's correct.
And in Pittsfield, is EPA going to reinstitute a lab and bring back the ability for a gas chromatograph and do your sampling testing there?
Are you asking if we're going to be setting up a mobile lab for on-site analysis? Is that what
Sure.
answering.
Not-
At this time,
not
no,
mobile.
we will be using EPA contracted labs to be doing this work. So the samples will be shipped out and sampled.
And Josh, you know if that's true of GE as well, given the number of samples, are they also liking to ship it to an existing lab versus a mobile lab? Do you know?
The report says submittal. I don't know if they've selected a lab for this work yet, but I would assume so.
Judy,
Does
follow up?
Does EPA use a lab consistently?
There's a couple there's hoops we have to jump through kind of internally for the selections of lab criteria. It's based off of what our management requires. So it's not typically always the same lab. No.
Give me an example of one or two labs that you use.
So the split sampling is done by an EPA contractor, and they have to submit it through what we call the CCLIP program. A couple labs that have been used in the past, I know, is Test America, Eurofins, and there's a few more I just don't know off the top of my head.
That's fine. Thank you.
Thanks, Judy. All right, great. Thank you. Robert, let me see if there's any CCC members first for questions, and then I'll go to public members. So any other CCC members for questions for Josh on Woods Pond, and then I'll go to Robert. Any other CCC questions? Okay, Robert, over to you. If you want to just state your name and affiliation would be great too. Thank you. And Robert, you're on mute.
Robert Heinzman, citizen of Lee.
Great, perfect. Thank you.
Just want to get clear about something. So basically, I've read the report. I thought it was, pretty well done. The science and the engineering all made sense to me. My question is just to clarify. So the actual determination of what gets shipped and what gets put into the landfill is determined by the site characterization in these samples.
It's dependent.
Once they pull the sediments out, they say, hey, this is dirty stuff. Everything you pull out of that area, that location, is going to go into a rail car. This place is below our limits. We can ship it up the hill. Is that basically the idea?
So this pre-design plan is to give us an idea and kind of contours of what contamination is currently in place within Reach 6, and based on developing those PCB weight averages, that will determine where that amount of sediment would be shipped to, whether it be the UDF or offsite disposal.
Okay, so you're going to map concentrations. That's going to give you isopleths or maps of concentrations, and you're going to dredge. GE's contractors are going to dredge and ship up the hill or ship it out of state, based on that map. That's what I understand, right?
This is Dean for a second.
Okay. Great.
If I could just weigh in for 1 second, if you want to look at the actual criteria, it's in the permit. I know it's a little detailed, but it's Appendix E of the permit, and it talks about how to calculate the averages based on a volume weighted average. And if the average is less than 25 milligrams per kilogram in Reach 5C, the material that averages less than 25 parts per milligram per kilogram in 5C, in Woods Pond, can go into the UDF. And there's some other requirements in there. So it's just not, I don't know, you generally got it right, but it's not just do like an isopleth map and then draw a box around it. So there are some requirements in that in the permit itself.
Right. There's a tolerance level where it gets shipped versus landfill. Yeah, I get that.
That's the main.
I want to understand the potential for error given the
Yes.
in that kind of with that kind of methodological approach of characterizing the site. That's all. You answered my question. Thank you.
Great, Robert. Thank you. All right. All right, Josh, thank you. Let's go ahead and move on to the monitoring and maintenance plan for non-GE owned dams.
All right. So as the group has heard me present in the past, GE does own 2 dams. It's the Rising Pond Dam in Great Barrington and the Woods Pond Dam in Lee Lennox. However, the final permit requires that GE for non-owned dams in Massachusetts ensure inspection, monitoring, and maintenance Now, these activities include maintaining the integrity of the dam to contain contaminated sediments. It also includes conducting sediment handling and offsite disposal and engineering controls related to dam maintenance, repair, upgrades, and enhancement activities. And other related activities, those other related activities are focused in, again, focusing on making sure that contaminated sediments aren't being conveyed downstream. Now, we have received 2 monitoring plans for Columbia Mill Dam and Willow Mill Dam, which are open for public input. The one thing I kind of really wanted to point out here is GE is not required for the operations of these dams. Their effort is solely focused in ensuring that the dam is not causing or is not in a situation where the contaminated sediments would not be sent downstream. The owners of these dams still have their legal obligations under the Office of Dam Safety, the Massachusetts Office of Dam Safety, to maintain their other inspections. So I just wanted to point out that these monitoring plans may seem very different if you were to compare them to the Rising Pond and Woods Pond Dam, but that's because their function, or GE's function for the dams, is different. They're again focusing on ensuring that contaminated sediments are remaining in place and that the dam can continue to do so. Now, these other activities may also include that if there is, say, a penstock or a raceway or something of that sort, forebay, that's being cleaned, they would be required to ensure that if it is contaminated with, well, they'd be required for sampling of that material. And then if there's any disposal issues because of PCB contamination, they would be responsible for assisting the owners with those costs. Any
Josh,
questions?
anything else? This is just one slide for this topic.
Yes.
Okay. Any questions about these 2 dams and the plans? Okay, why don't we yes, any questions from the CCC? And if not, I'll go to Claire. Any questions, CCC members? Okay, Claire, I see your hand. Go for it.
I'm just looking at the maintenance of the Columbia Mill Dam, and I saw that there were a lot of near failures in that dam that could need to be corrected soon, according to the contractor that you had examine the dam. And I think that there's quite a gray area here between whether it should be the owner of Columbia Mill or GE. The danger seems is rather imminent to have that dam leak or fail and contaminate the streets of the business section of Lee. I think that's a big concern that GE should take on, since it's their PCBs that would be causing and affecting the health of Lee residents. I think that they should step right in and get those repairs done as soon as possible and not wait until they get to that part of the river. Thank you.
And Josh, can you talk about the G's responsibility, I guess, versus the dam owner's responsibility to Claire's concern?
Yeah, that again, if there's conditions of the dam that are going to lead to sediment release or conveyance of sediment through that dam, GE is responsible to making sure that that is taken care of. But I do invite you, Claire, to submit your comments. This, I believe the Columbia Mill Dam is open. We have a slide coming up. I can't remember if it's the 20th or February 7th. But please submit your comment.
Right. Thank you. Thanks, Claire. Thanks, Josh. Okay, let's go ahead and move on to water withdrawal uses and sustainability and climate adaptation plan.
Sure. That's going to be my slides. Hi, everyone. My name is Chris Smith. I'm a project manager working on the GE site. I've actually been involved with the project for several years, but I don't think I've had the opportunity to present at one of these meetings. So nice to meet you all, and I look forward to working with you. I'm going to talk about two plans GE submitted in September of this year. the water withdrawal and uses plan, and the sustainability and climate adaptation plan. So I'll give a brief overview of each of those documents. One thing to keep in mind with both of these documents is that they're really forward-looking. And what I mean by that is they outline work that's going to be primarily performed during the remedial design for each remediation unit. So there's not a lot of specifics in these reports when it comes to the design, but what they do accomplish is get GE to commit in writing to steps they'll take to address these issues. So they are important in that way. Starting with the water withdrawal and use plan, this plan describes the activities that GE will take to identify industrial, commercial, and private withdrawals and uses of water from any portions of rest of river subject to remediation. And it also goes on to describe the design process that will be used to minimize impacts to any identified users. So in terms of what the process will look like moving forward, GE will evaluate potential impacts to water users during preparation of the conceptual RDRA work plan for each remediation unit. And then in the final RDRA work plans, that's where GE will identify the appropriate measures to be taken to mitigate impacts to affected users. And what those specific mitigation measures will be, that will be evaluated on a case-by-case basis. Potential measures include monitoring water quality, identifying alternative water sources, relocating water intakes, et cetera, that sort of thing. In terms of next steps, once this plan is approved by EPA, GE will begin that process of identifying users and gathering information from them to assess what the potential impacts might be. And then that will all build towards the information that will be ultimately in the design reports. Josh, you can go to the next slide, please. Okay, so moving on to the sustainability and climate adaptation plan. This plan describes the process for designing and constructing remediation activities for rest of river that will be resilient to the impacts of climate change. It discusses some of the localized projections of what climate change may impact in terms of this project. So that would be things like more intense storms and rainfall, periods of drought, changes to groundwater and surface water elevations. Those are the sort of impacts that the plan evaluates. And then finally, there's also a discussion of the sources of greenhouse gas emissions expected during construction and a discussion of ways in which some of those emissions might be mitigated. So again, there's not specific climate resilient designs laid out in this plan. There are examples given of what they might look like, but the specifics will come later during the remedial design for each remediation unit. So for example, if GE is designing a sediment cap and they need to use river flow projections as a part of that design, it'll be EPA's expectation that the projections they use consider the effects of climate change. So this is the plan we'll be able to point back to in order to compel GE to make the remedial design climate resilient. So EPA is continuing to review both of these documents along with our stakeholders. We are requesting any public input on them by December 20th. That will have been several months since they were submitted.
20.
So with that, I'll take any questions. Yeah.
Submit my comments.
So any questions for Chris regarding these two plans? Okay. Oh, Judy, you've got a question. Over to you.
Just a trip down memory lane for the water resources in the area of Woods Pond. As I recall, there are multiple very large wells that were drilled there by the Army Corps of Engineers, and it was, I think, for the benefit of the mill, some of the mill operations there. And then when they sampled and tested the water, it had very high levels of PCBs, and they capped those wells. Are you familiar with that? And do those wells enter into any of this?
I'm not familiar with that specifically. I'll ask around on our project team, but I know that in general, consideration of groundwater is a part of our review, not just surface water. So that's something that we are looking at with everyone that's involved in reviewing the document. And that's the type of thing we expect, the type of extraction that we expect GE to identify during this process.
And as for climate resilience, as we all know, it's very real, it's very tangible. And there's another PCB site in the United States in New York on the Akwesasne Indigenous Reservation. And it involves the Grass River with an Alcoa site that heavily contaminated that area. And they got a remediation and an in-wet capping that was supposed to last a very, very long time. And due to a bad icing situation where the river had an ice dam, and it completely scoured the river and took out all of the capping and exposed an untold amount of PCB contaminated sediments. I'm sure the EPAers are familiar with this site, and now they're starting from scratch again. So in light of the fact of what happened in Kent, Connecticut a couple of years ago with a massive ice jam, it's really indicated to design any capping, or even take away some of the capping and do more of a removal action than capping, because there's a good chance it might not last.
Yeah, thanks for the comment. Definitely, we are going to ensure that GE is designing this robustly and considering, extreme weather in all forms that may increase in likelihood because of climate change. So thanks for the comment.
And Chris, just a question in the chat. Is there a specific example of something that GE might have to do to be climate resilient or make the project climate resilient?
So again, I don't want to speak for exactly what will happen, but in that example I gave, if they're designing a cap, they could base it on current flows, but those might not represent the full range of conditions that we could expect to see in the future. So we would expect them to do a design that accounts for that full range of conditions. So it would be making the remedy more robust in ways like that.
Great, thank you. Okay, anything else on that for now? And otherwise we'll move to our next topic, which is the Upland Disposal Facility, also known as UDF Conceptual Design Plan. Thanks, Chris, appreciate it.
Thanks.
All right, who's presenting here?
Hi, so this is Rich Fisher. I'm the EPA project manager assigned to the UDF and the Upland Disposal Facility. And as most of you probably are aware, we received the pre-design investigation data summary and interim document from GE about a week ago. And we also received the UDF conceptual design plan. For people that are going to look at these, just so to avoid some confusion, they came in under the same cover letter, just letting people know, in case it can cause some confusion. Next slide. So we've only had the document for a week, so I'm just going to let you know ahead of time. I can't really speak too much to the contents, but I have, given it enough of a cursory look just to sort of describe to the folks out there what to expect to find in it. So in the pre-design investigation data report, again, it's interim. Data collection is ongoing. Ongoing data collection that will then factor into the final design. But at this point, it's what they have up to this point was used to help present their conceptual design. And in the pre-design investigation data summary, they have sections discussing the various work they've done since approximately June, involving habitat assessment. They were collecting soil cores and conducting a geotechnical investigation. They're also analyzing soil for to see what's in it, basically. And there's also been an ongoing survey of groundwater elevations, and as well as baseline monitoring for what the groundwater quality is currently. Also, there was a cultural resource assessment was conducted. Next slide. So then brings us to the conceptual design plan. That one includes the UDF's performance standards. Also has a design summary, includes perimeter berm and baseliner system, final cover system, leachate management, surface water management, and a discussion of UDF operations and support areas. They also have sections discussing measures to address habitat impacts, as well as closure and post-closure activities. So some of these, they're very preliminary, as in they're still in the process of data collection. So some of these things are a little more comprehensive than others, just letting you know ahead of time for those that are going to take a look. Anyway, next slide. So next steps for the UDF, these are the interim PDI and the conceptual design. So we have a public input period open until February 13th. And even before that, we're just continuing along with the groundwater investigations, or at least we're continuing along with our oversight of the groundwater investigations. And that's all going to lead to a final PDI or pre-designed data investigation report, along with the final design plan. So then following EPA's review and approval of the final design plan, there's a series of a few more documents that are likely to be in there, leading to anticipated construction beginning maybe in the summer of 2024. Next slide. Oh, I guess that was my last slide. So anyhow, does anybody have any questions?
So questions about kind of the submittals for the UDF in terms of the two pieces and kind of the stages or next steps. So Judy, over to you.
Yeah, there's no one else who hasn't spoken?
You're the only.
I've spoken.
Thank you, Rich. Thank you for that presentation. The cultural resources assessment. I briefly went through that and saw that that you found some indigenous articles in the area of the UDF. As best as you're able to speak about that, how is that going to impact your plans for the UDF?
So I haven't gone that carefully through that particular section. And so frankly, I'd rather not say until I look at exactly what it is you're speaking of. I apologize for that. I've been trying to get through as much of these documents as I could ahead of this meeting, but yeah, you apparently you beat me on that section.
Welcome to the citizen stakeholders world, where we're not engineers and we do the best we can, and then when we ask for an extension and it's rejected, it doesn't feel like we're respected or that we're a part of the process. So my next question is, in the hopeful event that either the litigation in federal court before the U.S. Circuit Court of Appeals with those plaintiffs, or one of the other actions through the municipality of Lee and or the Lee Board of Health action, or one of the other myriad of other legal actions that are taking place or about to take place. In the event, or when it happens, that it is ruled that this dump, as we know, is harmful to human health and the environment, do you have a bare-boned alternate plan that's in the sidelines in the event that the UDF is rejected?
Well, since it's our opinion that the landfill is going to be safe, so I'm not really anticipating a path that looks like that. But beyond that, I'd rather, frankly, defer to Dean, Tim, or John on anything related to all those other legal proceedings.
Oh, Dean will just yell at me, so forget that. Okay, that's it for now. Thank you so much for your presentation.
Thanks, Judy. There's a question in chat, Rich. I'll just read it to you and then you can answer. Will the review look at the surface and groundwater being discharged into the wetland and across GE and the Eurovia land until it reaches the Housatonic River?
Can you repeat that again?
Well, will this review look at the surface and groundwater being discharged into the wetland and across the GE and Eurovia land until it reaches the Housatonic River?
Well, I mean, there's copious groundwater monitoring wells in the area that we're, that is going to have data that we're going to evaluate. So I guess I'm not really sure how to answer that question specifically, except to say that there's going to be, a significant evaluation of groundwater quality and groundwater, like what the direction it's going in. So presumably it would cover that particular area that is being asked about.
And does GE and in its various studies, this one or others, look at essentially the landfill or the proposed landfill and look at stormwater discharge and how stormwater is handled and all those things to the surface water that might cut across the land?
So it does look like there's stormwater management. So to answer your question, yes, they're going to have to, and it looks like they've already started to do that in the conceptual design.
Okay, great, thank you. Let me go to Claire, and then there's another question in chat about the habitat plan I'll get to in just a second. But Claire, over to you.
I'll try to make this short, but I have a lot of concerns. I read the entire report that just came out 2 days ago. And as far as erosion control, there's quite a bit written in this report. I urge everybody to read it, how they are going to control the storm waters that may come down over the side of the upland disposal facility, how it will be considered sheet water flow down the side, and how under construction, this will be one huge concern. And then after construction, they are planning, of course, ground cover, but with sounds like a very involved system of berms and culverts and holding ponds and places to try to hold, ways to try to hold the water back. And it seems to me they are recognizing how dangerous this particular hill is with its sandy nature. Also, it refers to a, quote, recently restored grassland area that's up where the actual UDF will be dug into. And that, again, was a conservation area zoned by Lee as conservation and restored many years ago by Lane Construction when they accidentally went into that area with their mining. That has been restored. There's trees, a few trees, and little and they recognize that there's vernal pools there and that they will mitigate if there are soils that inadvertently slide down into these vernal pools. And that's so scary. And it's first time that I've heard GE or EPA agree that there is an extensive wetland there in the southeast corner, an intermittent stream flowing down into that wetland, all down below the UDF, and will be, according to that report that just came out, there must be at least 30 different Massachusetts laws and federal laws that GE cites, environmental laws, and they note in their table of all these laws that they are applicable. And then their explanation of how they'll handle it is they'll do everything they can to follow the regulations of Massachusetts and federal for endangered species, for vernal pools, for wetlands, and so on. And if that fails, they will then be waived by the EPA because there is no practicable alternative. And This is an impossible site to do all the preparatory work that they need to do. And that's what EPA said originally, that this was not a suitable site. There is not enough room. There's only a small area up on top where they can put the UDF, and if you look at their maps, very little land left that's not wetland or forested for their preparatory and staging areas for dewatering and so on. And there's no explanation yet of the pumping and how that, whether or not that, it always says, if feasible in their reports, if feasible. It seems like by now they could know whether or not it's feasible. I'm sorry to take so long, but.
Well, I mean, you raise a lot of points, so, obviously I can't respond to all of them, but that's why we have the public input period. You could put them in writing and send them in, but I will point out that design processes are iterative, and that's why, it's, it might, if feasible, depending on ongoing data collection. These designs are an ongoing iterative, something like this is very much an iterative process. Just a couple things though. A detention pond is a very common stormwater management feature. We have every intention of ensuring that they manage stormwater appropriately. And the vernal pool I'm familiar with is above the consolidation area, not below it. So there shouldn't be any work that I can envision that should be impacting that. But anyhow, because there was, it would be easier for me to see these comments in writing, and rather than responding off the cuff to all of them, which is why we have the public input period. But anyway, I appreciate your concerns. Thanks.
Rich, there's a question about there's a question, I'll go to the other members of the public in a second. There's a question in chat just about what's actually in the habitat assessment. Do they cover wetlands, vernal pools, endangered species?
So again, I don't want to speak too definitively on the content because I've only started to go through it, but I've seen what appear to be, wetlands delineated, vernal pool identified, different, what do you call it, like forest type regimes mapped out. So as far as my memory will serve me right now, again, off the cuff.
Great, thank you. Let me go. So I think that, and I think I see hands for the public. So if there's no more CCC member questions, I'll go to the three members of the public whose hands are up. And just if you could state your name and affiliation as you speak. I think I've got Nancy and Monica, then Gail. Nancy, over to you.
This is Nancy Cohen from New England Public Media. In this report, it says there is a certified vernal pool. As people have stated, it says they have found potential habitat for endangered species at the state level, listed by the state and the federal government. So this is really a question for, I don't know, for Tim Conway maybe, is so what happens? As Rich Fisher said, if it's not affected, then if the vernal pool isn't affected, then is not a problem? Or if you find these things, if you find endangered species and you find a vernal pool that's certified, is anything done, or are you just able to still build the UDF there?
EPA, somebody on, but Tim or otherwise can speak to that.
Sure. I think we need to, we would need to look at the whole context of it, Nancy. That's a really good question. I think we need to have the team circle back and take a look at what it says in there and work from that.
And this is Gene, just to point out that the habitat assessment was on the entire GE parcel. The actual UDF landfill where the material is going to go is only 20 acres of that parcel. So this vernal pool where it was identified is not in the area on the property where the actual disposal facility will be constructed. So that's not to say it's not very important, but there may be some areas that could be completely avoided. So I just want to point out that the assessment is it's the whole property, which I think is 70 acres, and the facility itself, the actual landfill, excluding very close stormwater basins, is 20 acres.
And Dean, what was the total acreage of the property as a total again, one more time?
I think 70, but I'm not positive. I guess the major point is it's much bigger than the the disposal area.
Disposal area is 50.
Thank you. Okay.
Right, and I'll point out that we had them evaluate the entire property because as I pointed out, the iterative nature of the process, we weren't, GE wasn't sure, so therefore neither were we, where the entire footprint would be, since they weren't not at the time know where the entire footprint would be. We had them evaluate everything.
Great, thank you. Let me go to Monica, then Gail. So Monica, over to you. Then if you could just introduce yourself and your affiliation. And Monica, you're on mute right now.
Okay. All right. So Monica Ryan, citizen of Lee. And just to follow on that topic, that the UDF is only 20 out of the 70 approximately. Getting to it, the facility, the working on the whole land, is also an area that would destroy a vernal pool or areas of, habitat that's endangered. So while, Dean, you say that you're only concerned about the UDF, I'm concerned about all the land. And if there's vernal pools and wetlands that are going to get destroyed by trucks driving over it or machinery pumping and all kinds of activity going on the land around the UDF, that's also a concern. And I should think that it should be a concern for the EPA. So that's just a follow up to that. But my reason for my question was that, as far as I know, they have not, GE and this plan has not yet determined a liner that is safe or guaranteed to not have a leak. And at what point in the planning process that was outlined just prior on the previous screen, at what point do they say the plan can go ahead without that assurance that this will not leak or that there's a guarantee? My concern is that they still don't have it. They're hoping it will, I guess, somehow be fabricated, but correct me if I'm wrong, is there a company right now that exists in the world that can provide a guarantee to their product that would be the liner for the UDF? Please advise on that.
Well, first of all, I apologize if I misspoke. I did not, if I said it, I did not mean to say that the areas outside the UDF we're not concerned with. I was just pointing out that their GE has not, they have some preliminary information on where a stormwater basin is. They have some preliminary information on where the pipeline is going to run. We are very concerned if they disturb the vernal pools. I think what I was trying to get at is they may be able to avoid completely any construction or access roads over the vernal pool and some other areas. And so if I misstated that, that was not my intent. But I don't believe, need to use every square inch of the parcel that they evaluated. But as Rich said, it's iterative. You have to get the information first and then come up with your plan. With regard to your other question, I'll defer back to Rich on the next steps in the design process.
Rich, over to you on the liner.
So, I don't really want to speak to that without having gone through this, what's been presented in this particular design document and what'll be in the final design document. I think it would be premature of me to speak to that, but I think that we can expect that the liner will be competent and functional and adhere to the performance standards that are in the permit. I don't really know that I can say much more about it than that right now.
But your question, once you've reviewed the document and not just you, but EPA in general, and then gone through it, I assume that you will obviously give a response to GE with issues, concerns, ideas, changes. Is that correct?
Of course, that's basically the step following our receipt of public input.
So again, at some point in 2023, then, and falling back to the CCC here, it may be important to understand how GE reviewed that plan when you have time to do it, and what your concerns, comments, or ideas were regarding that. So we probably note that for a future one.
Sure. With the understanding that some of these things won't be until the, subsequent design document, but sure, what you said is a true thing.
And Rich, as you know, there's an iterative process, so there's another design plan after this one too. So
Right. Right.
good. Charlie, if it's okay, I'm going to go to Gail, then I'll come back to Charlie as CCC member. So Gail, over to you, and then back to Charlie. And Gail, if you just identify your affiliation too. Gail, are you there? We don't hear you.
She's muted. Gail, you're muted.
Sorry, I was talking.
There you go. Now we have you. Perfect.
Okay. Gail Ceresia. I'm a resident of Lee, and I'm also a wetland scientist. And so what I see, when I see we have an ACEC, we have an aquifer, we have October Mountain that provides spring water and surface water to the north of the proposed landfill between Woods Pond and the proposed landfill, with extremely permeable soils and a bedrock that is been shown to have fractures, possibly caves, and ways for the contaminated water to get to the aquifer. And then all this eventually goes into the goes back into the Housatonic River. So my question to you is, when does this site become deemed not a good site by EPA? Or is this just, we're going to move forward and put the landfill here regardless of all this information? Can you answer that?
Well, that's
When,
an
at
awful
what
lot.
point would you guys consider this site not acceptable?
I don't anticipate that happening, because in our opinion, it's very acceptable.
Dean, do you want to just speak briefly to the process that led to kind of the, I mean, obviously it was years, but a short version of essentially how EPA got to this place in terms of just the process?
Money.
I think since this is in federal court, that's the exact question in federal court. EPA's gone over numerous times the process that got us here. It's all on the record. I would defer to what's in the record.
Yeah, great, thank you, Dean. And Dean, I can't remember the right name of that actual final decision document. It was, I don't know if it was a record of decision. What was the name of the document that made
the final permit?
Okay, the final permit. Thank you.
So in other words, you guys didn't do any investigation of the UDF site. You've just picked a spot and decided it was all okay, regardless of the information that you're gathering today or in the last few months. It doesn't matter what's out there. You've decided that this is the site. Now, I want to bring up something that nobody else, or maybe some people have thought about. Okay, let's say the landfill leaks, okay? Or while you're constructing the site, you put so much PCBs on the site that it winds up going back into the river, okay? So what you've done is you created a landfill, and so most likely it's going to leak, because that's what EPA even says. So it winds up going back into the Housatonic River. Okay, so basically what you've done is taken the check dam, which is Woods Pond Dam, that holds a lot of the PCBs back, and you've put it in a landfill, which is going to leak into our aquifer or be carried away through climate change in the storm water that comes down that mountain, and there's a lot of it, believe me, and goes across the land, goes across the Eversource and Eurovia's land till it reaches the Housatonic. So you basically have bypassed your check dam, which is the Woods Pond. Now it flows down the Housatonic River. You're proposing to get rid of a couple of other dams. I just do not see how this makes sense. And I know that you're an engineer and you believe you can engineer anything, but engineers don't always have success. We've seen a lot of times where things have failed, and these landfills have been shown to fail And I'm sorry, but you really need to change your mindset. You need to look at the facts and stop stonewalling us and saying you gotta wait till the final design, because you know darn well that you do not have a liner that will stop anything. And during this whole process, you are going to be polluting at least 200 acres. That's not counting Woodland Road or the area, you know, the terrain that you traverse carrying these PCBs through trucks or however you decide you're going to do it. You're not taking any of that into consideration. You are at the maybe 1.5 miles at the headwaters of Lee, and you do not seem to care about the people that live around this PCB dump. And I think you really need to look at the facts and stop stonewalling us.
Great.
That's my comment. You've basically said, it doesn't matter what's out there, you're just gonna put the dump there, even though we're telling you it's not a good site. You know who it's good for? It's good for GE. And I'm beginning to think that EPA is not doing their job. I thought you were supposed to be protecting the
Gail,
public.
thank you. I'd like to give EPA a chance to respond, then I need to go to Charlie. I would also ask that people do not use the chat for commentary. The chat's for questions if they come up, but it's not for commentary, please. So EPA, if you want to respond, please. I'm going to go to Charlie.
Yeah, Gail, this is John Kilborn. One thing you can look at for more details and more facts about the UDF and the protectiveness is our detailed response to comments. It is a long document, but the one of the first sections does talk about the factors where we believe, and I understand there's difference of opinion, but it gives the factors that we believe that this UDF is safe and protective of human health and the environment. So that's on the record, and has our position regarding the permit that we issued in 2020.
Thank you, John. I'm going to go to Charlie next. Charlie.
As this site continually is looked at and investigated and more documents come out about it, now you talk about a vernal pool, and yes, it's not in the footprint of the actual dump, but the construction of any type of facility like that takes into account a lot of additional construction areas. You're talking about a collection pond, you're talking about, how we control water runoff and anything like that. If you're going to be changing that potential protected watershed or vernal pool area in any way, because you're going to change the water runoff that could flood that area or actually cause more damage and destroy that vernal pool, I mean, that all has to be taken into consideration as you continually get these documents and look at them. EPA is the Environmental Protection Agency, and we rely on you to be our voice against corporations that willfully pollute and destroy communities. I've lived in Pittsfield my entire life, and believe me, having GE here was not always the best thing for this community. So again, you have to look at everything sensitively, and I hope that's what you'll do as these investigations continue.
We expect to do so, and that's a good comment on the vernal pool, and please feel free to submit such a comment.
Charlie, thank you. I'm going to go. We're about time for the next agenda item, but two things I want to go to: a question in chat, then declare, and then we'll wrap this section for tonight. There was a question to Dean: is in the final permit, is there any characterization of the porosity of the glacial till substrate characterized? So that would be in the final.
Not in the permit, but I believe in this report, and EPA has stated on the record, we agree with Commenters, this is the substrate is gravel. It's sand, and it's highly permeable. There's no debate about that. We concur completely that it's permeable. As John said, our rationale for why we believe the remedy can be conducted safely is in the response to comments, and there's a series of factors, but there's no question that the substrate is permeable.
Great, thank you. Clara, I think you have the final comment tonight on this topic. So over to you, then we'll talk about other documents coming up.
I just wanted to mention that I reread that EPA appeals board decision, and it was based on EPA not recognizing the EPA Region 1, not recognizing that there were some changes in the decision to allow this dump now where they had not allowed it in 2016 when they had been against it. And the reason the Environmental Appeals Board did not support the appeal was because EPA didn't recognize the fact that there were going to be lesser PCBs in this upland disposal facility, and also that there was going to be a pumping function. Well, in this last report that came out, there is indication that there will be higher level PCBs in the dump. I was amazed to see that. I just wanted to point that out and just remember that this was turned down, this site, by EPA back in 2016 because they didn't feel it was suitable. And then finally, the appeals board said that they didn't have any legs to stand on because they weren't recognizing this change in the hybrid change, hybrid in the sense that higher levels were going to be shipped out of state and lower levels would be kept in the UDF. And now we're seeing that that is being backed away from. Read the report. It's really important to read it. And I think everybody should have read this before now. It's really too bad that it came out just 2 days before. Thank you very much for listening.
Thank you for your comment.
Yeah, I just read Robert, I think it's Robert Heitzman's comment.
Yeah,
I don't, not to get too technical, I don't believe there's glacial till substrate. I think it's, and there's borings that are characterized in the report that Rich is referencing. I believe it's predominantly sand. Till to me is more like silt or clay. I just want to make it clear that, it's sand.
It's a lateral moraine from a glacier. So yeah, it's unconsolidated, variable grain size stuff. That's why there's a gravel pit there. But anyway.
Right. No, I concur. I just want to make it. I just wanted to make sure I answered the question as best as I could.
Yeah, I got an advanced.
I think of silt, but I'm not a geologist.
Well, see, that's it, Dina. I'm gonna have an advanced degree in geology. So, and I walk my dog there. So anyway, it's if you could address I don't know if we have time. If you could address my other question about the liner, I'd appreciate it. Maybe we don't have time. I don't want
to. I think there's no liner proposed in this current plan. The specs are there, and I think we'll stick with what we have on the record right now.
Dean, I'll just add to that, Robert. In the response to comments, we addressed the durability of liners, especially on pages 12 and 18.
And Kelsey, could you,
cool. Thank you. I appreciate that, John. Thank you.
If the response to comments is, I assume it's online. Kelsey, if you don't mind just putting the link in chat, then it would be right there for people if they want to look at it. I know you go to the website, but sometimes it's easier.
That would be awesome. Thank you.
Yeah. So Kelsey, there's a way to put that link. I so appreciate it. One last question, because we just have it, and then we'll go on to rest of river and documents and close. I think there's a question of who will confirm that all lower level PCBs will be put in the UDF. Will it be monitored? I think that was actually part of our discussion earlier today about kind of the site characterization and plan. But do EPA want to talk a little bit about how you confirm that lower levels of PCBs go into the UDF and higher levels are shipped out somewhere else?
I would say that that's a process that still needs to be determined with, with EPA approval. I mean, we're obviously going to come up with a way to make sure that that's what happens.
Yeah, so still subject to conversation and review and dialogue. Okay, thanks for that. Okay.
Yeah, I would say the first, the permit appendix E describes the process and the criteria for what can go in the UDF and what cannot, and a lot of that is driven by the data, and that's what's current. A lot of that was, and that's what's currently being collected right now: the data, and then the evaluation of the data, and then application to the requirements in the permit, and demonstrate that it either can go in the UDF or it cannot.
And then again, this will be the last question before we go to the next. Is typically once the landfill is in place, like how long is the landfill monitored for?
This will be monitored in perpetuity. That's what the permit says. As long as there's waste in place in a Superfund site, it needs to be monitored.
Okay, thank you. All right, let's go to Rest of River documents for public input and website revision for kind of just a slide here. I think I'm not sure who's going to cover that.
Hey everyone, this is Kelsey Dunville. I'm going to cover these ones. I'm a community involvement coordinator for the site. And Pat, I was just trying to get the link to the response to comments, so I will stick that in the chat in a second here as well. But right now I'm going to put in, so on our website, we have a section for these documents that are available for public comment. As you've heard a lot tonight, they're informal comments. They won't necessarily be responded to, but we are submitting a number of comments and issuing them, sharing them with the public, so you have an opportunity to give input on them. So the link to where those are is in the chat here. I don't need to go through them all. I think these are the ones that we've covered tonight. This is where you can find them on the homepage. They are right on the homepage with a button. You can just click there and they should all pop up. They're in a few different sections based on closed comment periods, open comment periods, and upcoming documents that will become available for comment. And the way to comment on those was highlighted on the bottom of the page too, which is just to send an email to the R1 Housatonic email box at epa.gov. I send out emails to the CCC list, which is the main members of the group, along with a few hundred others. So it goes out pretty far and wide. If you ever have questions about it or want to be added to the list, if you're not on there, please just reach out to me. If you're on this call and you're not there, hopefully you can put your information in the chat or follow up. But again, you can look on that page to see what is coming up, so you can get a sense of when they're going to be submitted to EPA by GE, and then an email goes out within ideally a day or two of us receiving that, and we post them on our website for folks to review.
Thanks, Kelsey. Judy, question.
Yeah, first question is for Attorney Conway. So Ms. Dunville just distributed a letter from Brian Olson to Andrew Silfer of GE relating to a press release that came out that I guess EPA came upon it, and it has to do with GE's corporate reorganization. So what I know is that GE corporate headquarters is moving, if not has moved, to Atlanta. And then there are going to be multiple entities, and then within GE of different aerospace and whatever else they're doing, the top three. And then the press release talks about first level spinoffs and then another level of future spinoffs. And Brian writes to, I'm paraphrasing, Brian writes back to EPA, reminding them of their obligation to this site, financial obligation. And I asked somebody today if GE had notified EPA of this major happening of their corporate reorg, and the answer was no. So it appears that EPA just found this out. And so my question is relating to the surety bond, which I bring up, I think, at every meeting. And Tim Conway, I have no confidence in the comprehensive financial place where the surety bond currently is at 150 million. And I would like to know why you're stopping at 150, and as time goes along, why it's not being incrementally increased periodically.
No, it's a good question, Judy. Thank you for asking that. You mentioned that that GE is, financially obligated. We believe that GE is contractually and obligated by a court order to do all of the work, as well as financially obligated to do the 150 million. So I think what you're saying is, what I guess what I'm trying to say is there are, in addition to the financial support from the $150 million surety bond, we also have made it clear in the consent decree, and we continue to make clear that GE is obligated by the consent decree to do all of the work, and the work is subject to a judicial order. The consent decree is, as you know, is blessed by the district court, and if somebody doesn't comply with a court order, we can pursue them for that. They're obligated under the consent decree, and then even if those don't work, as far as making sure the cleanup is sufficiently protected, the surety bond is the amount that we decided on, consistent with the consent decree, as the backup. I can't. I don't want to speculate on or talk too much about what our plans are if it turns out that the situation isn't, even with all of those protections, those different levels of protection, if those came to pass, we certainly are going to ensure to the best of our ability that the party responsible for the risks posed by the contamination is the one that's responsible for cleaning it up. And I think, and John could probably add to this too, but the letter to GE was designed to, make sure they realize that that's our viewpoint.
I thought it was particularly not classy, if not rude, for GE not to notify EPA that the reorganization is happening, and as a courtesy to reach out to you. And when things like this get nasty at this site between GE and EPA, we know that there's most times more things going on in the background than we'll ever know about. So I will continue to get on the record that $150 million in a surety bond, as we continue to keep taking steps forward, and in the presence of the state of Connecticut that has no plans for the untold millions and millions of tons of contaminated sediments in Connecticut, primarily behind the dams, that Connecticut doesn't even seem to care about. Someday, and now Connecticut is going to get spiked by the removal action up in Massachusetts, and that doesn't seem to be triggering anything in Connecticut. I can't even get signs up along the river for people of low income and English is not their first language, to try and help them make best decisions on whether or not to eat the contaminated fish. So 150 mil, it's not enough, but thank you.
I know, I appreciate that. I appreciate that, and I appreciate you bringing that up.
Judy, thank you.
Tim, I guess just quickly to follow up, Judy and others on the call who may not be familiar with the letter. The letter, we sent the letter to GE to make clear our position that under the consent decree, all entities of GE, after they go through their reorganization, will be liable under the consent decree. So we wanted to make that position clear to GE. So that's the purpose of the letter.
Tim, a question, or John, can we post, is that letter on on your guys' website?
It is a public letter. I think we did. I think we put it up. I'm not sure. Dean, do you remember?
If it's not in the letter, it was in, if it's not on the web, it's on the website, but it was definitely in the distribution that Kelsey sent out with the link to that letter.
Nancy Cohen is asking for it. I'll send it to her.
Thanks, Judy. Appreciate it.
I have one question for Dean, even though you were nasty to me earlier, I forgive you. So Dean, earlier, many meetings ago, you talked about a conversation that EPA is having internally to create a new new trail stub on the east side of the river, on the east side. And I just wondered if there's been any progress in getting some of the trucks, the proposed trucks, off the road and onto a rail line that will bring the dredged sediments to the UDF.
We have not had further discussions on the transportation routes. I think that's going to come up shortly with General Electric, and I know some of the rail entities are interested in that. So it's not moved along further yet, Judy.
Okay, as it moves along, please consider, as we go forward in the event, excuse me, that the UDF does not fly as it's currently proposed, to get sufficient rail and to train everything out of town into a Tosca site like you had originally supported. Thank you.
Thank you, Judy. Any other questions from the CCC members before we close for tonight?
So Pat, sorry to jump in. I just wanted to make one comment on this slide, which we didn't get to either.
Yep, go for it.
Okay. So just briefly, this is an update that we recently made to the website on the homepage. You'll see that there used to just be the one collection where it says cleanup areas in focus. So we know that there's a lot of documents in the record here, and we wanted to try and make it a bit more easily accessible to anybody going to the webpage. So what we did here was created an extra column under rest of river. So instead of rest of river being under the cleanup areas in focus, we outlined it there, and you can just hopefully a little bit more easily navigate to those different subheadings under rest of river. And of course, if you ever have trouble finding documents, feel free to just reach out to me. But hopefully this is helpful.
Yep, Kelsey, that's great. Thank you so much. Okay. All right. Any other any other topics that we need to cover tonight? I think, well, Charlie, you have your hand up. Go for it.
Yeah. Obviously, the next potential meeting is not going to be until, late winter, maybe early spring. What's the thoughts of actually meeting in person? I know everybody likes sitting at home and it's convenient, and nobody has to drive out here to the Berkshires. It's a lot easier for EPA and all the facilitators and most other people. But I think it's really important that we actually do have a face-to-face meeting at some point, and I'll get in a room.
Sorry, Charlie, interrupt. Kelsey, over to you. I think you've done a little bit.
Yeah, so Charlie, we debated a bit on this meeting in particular. And our feeling here was that we haven't been in person in some time, and with it becoming winter and just illnesses increasing, it felt like not the wisest time to do that, but we definitely are open to that. We've started to do more in-person meetings. We just talked about the interest from the CCC. So I think for the next meeting, we'll definitely reevaluate before we plan a virtual meeting. And a piece of it too is we've done a lot of hybrid at some other venues. It's not the easiest thing to do, and it doesn't really lend itself to great conversation, which I think has been beneficial either fully virtual in person. So those are things that we'll just have to discuss, but mostly we just felt with, December, and I know there was snow out there yesterday and increasing illness, it didn't feel like the right time to switch back to in-person, but we definitely hope to do that in the future.
And is there any possibility, as things continue to move forward, that there can be another plan to actually visit the proposed dump site location with the CCC membership? I know that was done in the past. That was something that I was not available to attend. And
Yeah, I'll let Rich or others chime in, but I think the answer would be yes. I don't think this is probably the best time of year to do it. But
no.
Yeah, so similar. We did do a couple of tours or site visits with other interested parties in the fall. So, hopefully I'm not speaking out of turn, but I don't think that should be an issue sometime when the weather's.
And typically what we've done is we've used a summer meeting to often do a tour, as Charlie noted. So, that may be the time to do that then. Great. Thanks, Charlie.
Thank you.
So it's just slightly past time. Appreciate the good comments and questions. We will follow up with, again, I've noticed over the next CCC meeting, as Charlie noted, probably late winter, early spring. Judy, I'll reach back out to you around the meeting minutes and Connecticut DEEP too to get those clear. And I think with that, we'll close for tonight. Thank you, members of the public, for attending. For folks who sent me private chats with emails to add to the list, I forward those to Kelsey to add. So those are done. And we look forward to seeing you all in roughly 2 to 3 months. So thank you all.